Петте наши европски приказни беа посветени на резултатите на либералните и демократски вредности, кои на Европа и ги донесоа најголемите благодети во незината долга историја полна со војни. Западниот дел на континентот за прв пат по Втората светска војна успеа да обезбеди траен мир и благосостојба за своите граѓани, благодарејќи токму на овие либерални принципи и вредности.
We cannot aim at anything less than the union of Europe as a whole, and we look forward with confidence to the day when that union will be achieved.
Бевме во Италија да видиме како граѓанската иницијативност и професионалниот интегритет ги победија корумпираните политичари и мафијата. Потоа бевме во Финска да го истражиме феноменот на финскиот образовен систем втемелен на критичко размислување. Потоа ја посетивме Данска, чија демократија успеа да ги интегрира во својот систем идеологиите какви што се анархизмот и хипикултурата. И на крајот во Германија, каде што ги регистриравме фазите на долгиот процес на помирувањето на германците со нивното нацистичко минато, што им овозможи денеска да бидат една од најразвиените држави во светот. Овие вредности врз чија основа се формираше европската конструкција, беа инспирации за силни историски процеси, како што беше рушењето на Берлинскиот зид и желбата на милиони граѓани од Источна Европа да и се придржат на Европската унија. Па и покрај успехот на овие цивилизацијски вредности, тие во последната деценија се, како никогаш досега во историјата, доведени во прашање, а наместо нив, се повеќе на политичкиот пазар во Европа се нудат идеологии со авторитарни тенденции, кои во голема мера ги предизвикуваат освоените човекови права и слободи. Во оваа последна епизода од нашите европски приказни се обидовме да ги откриеме причините за ваквите ретроградни тенденции. И кога станува збор за авторитарни тенденции, кој го добија името и либерализам, најинтересна да ја посетиме ни се виде Унгарија, во која веќе 12 години неприкосновено владее Виктор Орбан, авторот на терминот и либерализам. Но кои се причините унгарското општество со слободарска традиција, прво кое во 1956 година му се спротивстави на советскиот тоталитаризам и кое постигна изворен развој со пристапувањето кон неу, исто така прво да го заврти грбот кон либералните вредности. Како владее Виктор Орбан со неговиот и либерализам е добро позната матрица, слична на разни авторитарни и популистички идеологии. За ова ни зборуваше Кинга Гонц, ќерка на првиот демократски избран претседател во Унгарија, Арпад Гонц, и поранешна шефица на унгарската дипломатија.
He built up on a very systematic way a system of controlling media and influencing people's mind, stealing money for preserving power later on, and the EU resources were very useful in that sense, and also changing the whole legal system, the constitution and everything in a way, how he can also control the political life in a totalitarian way, basically. I think you might know that Orban's close friends and allies are in all important positions, although they are independent branches of power. On the surface, it looks like this, but at the same time, the Speaker of the Parliament was a classmate of Orban. The President was another classmate, an old friend of Orban. The Chief Prosecutor is a former Fidesz member, and I can continue this basically.
Виктор Орбан ја започна политичката кариера во раните 90-ти години како проминентен либерал, оксфордски студент инспириран од англосаксонскиот модел на либерализам. Во Будимпешта запознавме некои од неговите ментори, како Миклош Харасти, еден од познатите дисиденти кои учествуваше во транзицијската влада по падот на комунизмот во Унгарија.
This is a quiet, very disciplined revolution, and I don't think there is any chance to stop before we achieve real democracy in this country, and we are working very hard to make this transition smooth, but we cannot be satisfied with half solutions.
He was my buddy, he was my friend. I can even claim he was my pupil. I was the one who organized the first press conference of Fidesz. I was the one who introduced him to the foreign press in Budapest. I actually have to tell you, I was proud of him as a fresh, powerful talent for liberalism. I was proud that liberalism has so talented continuers in the country. But he turned out to be a Machiavellist and anything go, a totally postmodern type of dictatorial willkraft.
Од либерал, па и либерал, демохристијанин до националист. Како и зошто се случи овие политички метаморфози на Виктор Орбан?
And then in a certain moment, Orban, who was present in the Hungarian politics from the time of the changes and started as a liberal politician, realized that there is a gap on the right side. And also realized that those people who are the losers of these changes can be somehow the supporters of a populist politics. And it was the time when he got in the power and he started not just to turn to the right, but also to become more and more populist. And he totally divided the situation. He somehow satisfied people's needs for identity, and nationalist ideas are always very useful in terms of identity, supporting identities and identity questions in a country. I think you, as a former Yugoslav country, know it very well how dangerous it is.
But as he saw the nationalist center-right losing ground because of the unpopular measures what they took, Orban realized a political space is opening up. He's a particularly talented politician. He saw the opportunity, left his liberalism, and suddenly moved to the center-right and started to use nationalistic and increasingly religious terminology.
Виктор Орбан својата политичка кариера започна со инвенција на либерализмот, термин кој самиот тој го лансираше во светската јавност. Нова идеологија која е во антагонизам со традиционалните либерални вредности.
Viktor Orban is a very able man. He is not only able as a political manipulator, because he's a political manipulator. He doesn't really have any deep ethical beliefs or commitments. He goes where he thinks the votes are. But he also has theoretical imagination. He has a law degree, but he actually has some understanding of political science and sociology. And he created this incredible term of illiberalism. This term, illiberalism, is now full in the Western press. You open the New York Times, they will call Orban-type politicians illiberals. Now, what was the idea of Orban with illiberalism? He said the problem with liberalism that it overemphasizes the freedom of individuals. And what we really have to look at is the liberalism of the nation, a freedom of the nation, the interest of the nation, and not the interest of the individuals. So illiberalism is something which will overemphasize the nation's interest over the individual interest.
Професорот Сезелни е исто така еден од познатите дисиденти во Унгарија, кој поради своите слободарски убедувања бил протеран од земјата во 80-тите години, пошто заминува во САД, каде кариерата ја гради како професор на Универзитетот Јейл. Професорот Сезелни имали средба во 4 очи со Орбан само ден пред неговиот говор во кој го најавува и либерализмот како негова нова идеологија.
He spent 2.5 hours with me, face to face, just the two of us. And he was trying on me his speech about illiberalism. And all what I told him, look, I understand what you are saying about. That's true, there is some collective interest. Occasionally, we have to limit individual. If you go on the bicycle, should you wear a hat or not? In the United States, so-called libertarians, not liberals, libertarians say no. This interferes with my individual freedom. I want to take the risk to die if I have an accident. You will not die, you will get in a hospital, and it will take a lot of public money to keep you alive, right? So therefore we can require you that you have to wear a mask. So that, I said, in this respect, that's true. But tell me, how will you know what is in the national interest when the individuals don't want to take it? He did not have an answer to this question. And he doesn't have an answer to this very day. His answer is really that the executive, primarily he himself, and some of the people around him will decide what has to be required from everybody.
И либерализмот како главно мото на Орбан не траеше долго со оглед на неговата непопуларност во Европската унија, чии фондови имаат битно значење за граѓаните на Унгарија и особено за оние во руралните делови кои се лојални гласачи на Орбан.
Orban has changed face and flag and ideology so many times during his long career. And even his new brainchild, illiberalism, has already changed the explanation. When originally in 2014, in the Transylvanian city of Tusnádföld, in a Hungarian youth camp gathering, he announced that concept in his famous illiberal speech. But he meant at that time that liberalism, the concept of freedom, should not be the guiding principle of the Hungarian nation. It should be the national interest and the centrality and personalization of power. Then when European allies have asked what this is about, we have shared values of liberal rights. That's what, and liberalism. He meant, no. He just meant a government without liberals, which was not the case, because if you read every other speech of his and all the press, it just meant damning liberalism of the West, commemorating the so-called decline of the West because of its liberalism, and praising Russia, Turkey, and even China for its successful illiberalism. The later concept, which is valid today, is Christian democracy, government that is dedicated and organized around preserving the past traditions.
Новиот наратив на Орбан е сега поранештата слава на Унгарија од времето по Првата светска војна и тогашниот контроверзен унгарски премиер Хорти.
But the concept that that frees history and go back to the Horthy era, to the last moment when Governor Horthy was still full in power, and leave Budapest in that state. It just symbolizes the fact that when we come in and go into parliament, and we step right away into former grandeur of Hungary, and forget about communism, forget about post-communism, forget about liberal democracy, and we step from parliament right away to a former form of illiberalism. The Horthy era is the ideal of Orban in many, many ways.
Во овие политички лавирања на Орбан ќе пострада и Имре Наѓ, херојот на демократските традиции во Унгарија, кој е првиот лидер на комунистичка земја кој јавно побарал напуштање на советскиот блок спротивставувајќи му се на Сталин, што ќе го плати со неговиот живот.
So Imre Nagy has a statue here.
Yes,
It was built after the changes in 90s and end of the 80s, and because of course you liberal, you celebrate Imre Nagy as somebody who wanted to bring democracy and liberalism in 50s.
More than
So
that.
where is the statue now?
That white statue there is in the place of the Imre Nagy statue. The Orban's relationship with Imre Nagy itself shows his changes, because he made his fortune, political fortune, in the summer of 1990, when he pronounced his famous speech at the reburial of Imre Nagy, of the hero of the 56th revolution, who declared Hungary is stepping out of the Warsaw Pact, and was 2 years later executed for that and buried in a nameless grave. And there was a nice statue there for him by the first built by the first governments of democratic governments of Hungary after the change. Later, he removed that, in spite of the fact that he made his political fortune by praising Imre Nagy. He wanted this square to be the exact replica as it looked in 1944, before communism.
And
That's
at
the
that time
explanation.
there was no Imre Nagy.
Yeah, this is a marble version of his constitution.
So that's the place where the statue of Imre Nagy was.
That's where Imre Nagy statue stood, and Orban removed it to the other edge of the parliament, to the Margaret Bridge, and replaced it with that was the last piece of recreating the square as it used to be in 1944.
So this very same statue was
This is very same,
before,
but
1944.
Not very same. They remade it. Everything was remade. It didn't exist.
So it's brand new.
It's brand new.
Okay.
Brand new old.
Brand
This
new
is
old, yeah.
which can be a nickname of Orban's regime. Yeah, it's brand new old.
Ова е куса анатомијата на еден популист кој не би бил толку забележителен и привлечен како тема ако беше изолирана појава на европската политичка сцена. И либерализмот на Орбан е само една од демонстрациите на новите идеологии во Европа, кои се градат на основа на негација на традиционалните либерални вредности. Овие феномени ги истражува Институтот за хуманитарни науки во Виена, чий директор е Миша Глени, инаку поранешен новинар кој ја следеше транзицијата во Источна Европа.
Well, obviously it has real challenges, very serious challenges. I'm speaking just a couple of weeks after Marine Le Pen gained a significant vote in France. She didn't win, but we've never seen a candidate of the far right gain so many votes in France before. So obviously, despite the fact that after Russia invaded Ukraine, there was generally a sense that populism and populist leaders like Orban, Kaczynski suffered something of a blow because of the Russian invasion. It hasn't wiped out the appeal of populism, which remains strong in almost all countries. And I think the reason for that is that while Vladimir Putin represents a sort of the apotheosis of populism and the type of leader that characters like Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen aspire to, populism in Western Europe and in Central Europe is in essence a homegrown phenomenon. And so we have to look, it's no good blaming Putin for everything in terms of the state of democracy. You know, he might have supported Donald Trump through a few Facebook adverts in critical areas like Ohio. He might have welcomed Brexit because it fragmented Western structures. But he is ultimately not responsible for that. Responsible for that are the systems and the processes and the electorates and the politicians in Europe and the United States. So we have to look at ourselves. Why is it that 30 years after what promised to be the great expansion and liberation of democracies and social market economies, why is it that we're in such a mess that we are now? Because we do remain in a mess.
Каде и како погрешија унгарските либерали за да се создаде идеолошка празнина која ја пополни една ваква идеологија каква што застапува унгарскиот премиер Виктор Орбан?
I think it's a long story. Also, after the changes, after 89, Hungary was following this track, and Hungary had a peaceful transition in the sense that it was a negotiated change. You know that the former Socialist Party provided the power and allowed to have a multi-party system and democratic election and so on. I think one of the reasons is the economic difficulties, and I think you might know this, that after the changes, there is an economic collapse, and it means that many people lose their jobs, many people suffer from poverty, suffer from insecurity. In the socialist system, there were secure jobs, people had a secure, although very low income. And I think many people were able to somehow to be retrained, to find a new job in the new economy and so on. But there were also many who were not able to do this. And I think these people somehow were disappointed with democracy, because democracy came hand in hand with poverty, with loss of security and so on for many. And if Hungary could start again, which is impossible in the history, I think it would be very important to pay more attention to this type of problems, to the economic problems and poverty issue in one hand.
Western companies actually bought up these firms, shut it down, because they wanted to unload their American or British or French refrigerators or buses in these countries that created massive unemployment. So I think these were the mistakes I would not say Hungarian, East European style of liberalism.
Privatization, of course, is a risky business. Privatization, of course, creates big inequalities very quickly in a nation where, as I stress, doesn't have yet the immunization against power grab either by government or by big capital. But that's not the reason for illiberalism, that's the pretext for illiberalism. That's the meat from which the predators of illiberalism feed. You know? So that's not the... yes, the wisdom of having a more social democratic, if you wish, or more balanced distribution of wealth in order not to create tensions that later can be used by illiberals. That's a wisdom that comes afterwards.
Една од големите грешки на либералните политички структури во раните 90-ти години беше и методот на копи-пейст реформи во економскиот систем кој како урне ги искористија конзервативните политики на капитализмот во Западна Европа, што создаде сериозни социјални потреси.
Now, as liberalism came into the post-communist countries, and that was particularly true in Hungary, liberalism is meant not Democratic Party liberalism, it meant Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. It meant the Republican Party liberalism, which meant unleash, everything will be solved if you have an unregulated market. No sane Democrat who is a liberal would subscribe to this. This is a democratic principle. Interestingly, the ones who call themselves liberals in Hungary borrowed liberalism from Margaret Thatcher. They borrowed the liberalism of the conservatives. They implemented really conservative economic policies, which meant restriction, right? And uncontrolled privatization and uncontrolled opening of the markets to the world market. I actually never liked this as an American democratic liberal. I always knew that markets are good, but markets do need some control by a democratic government. That was not the case here.
Кога се говори за грешките, моите соговорници во Будимпешта сега го увидуваат проблемот на запоставените реформи во образовниот систем, кој не овозможи градење на демократска култура, возејќи се на инерцијата од тоталитарните образовни формати.
On the other hand, what is very difficult to change the educational system. And I think what we learned in this process, that it is not enough to change the political system, not enough to change the economic system, but you have to influence people's mind, to have democracy in their mind and to learn how to behave in democracy, what does it mean to be in control of political processes. And it was quite slow, the change of the economic system, and also the new generation didn't learn what does it mean, how they can raise their voice, how they can form opinions, how they can negotiate issues, how they can cope with conflicts and so on.
Yeah, there were many mistakes made, but you know, yeah, we could enumerate them. There was a mistake of believing that liberalism has won, believing that freedom is guaranteed forever, believing that people understand that the cruel realities, economic realities of change, people will realize these are leading to the common good after all. But I am not because I was part of those mistakes. I was part of those mistakes when I was in politics. But this is not what led to this. What led to this is the eternal rule of young democracies. If you look at Germany in 18, the Weimar Republic, if you look into the United States in the first 30 years of its existence, or if you look to France during the years of Bonapartism, of Bonaparte III, you know, the same electoral quasi-democratic coup made. This is what made Western-type democracies, that they go through the lesson that freedom can be lost from inside, not from outside occupiers, but by democratic rules, by parliamentary rules. And when they realize that, and they live and go and fight through that crisis, and they understand that there is no way but themselves defeating, then they become a quite safe, quite sustainable Western-type democracy, not before that. And it's very easy for this to happen, and the proof is that it happens everywhere, in former communist countries, not because a Huntingtonian cultural determinism that Animal Farm, these people never change. That's not the case. The case is that a long dictatorship helps people not to realize at first that they have to come to the defense of them. This is what is happening now here. This is what is happened in Slovakia not long ago and during the Mačija rule. And this is what will happen, I hope very much so, in the all Western edge of the former Soviet communist civilization, and we will, after all, get back to liberal democracy. So this is a challenge that is unavoidable, and the people have to go through this crisis in order to defeat it.
Through kind of catharsis.
Exactly. A catharsis that comes only through their own activities.
Системот на Виктор Орбан беше инспирација и за словенечкиот политичар Јанес Јанша, кој слично на Орбан кариерата ја започна како либерал, но ја продолжи во и либералната политичка матрица. За овој пат на демократските вредности во Словенија имав можност да поразговарам кусо со поранешниот словенечки председател Милан Кучан.
Pa ne vidim da su baš neke velike greške. Taj je život zemlje kao život čovjeka, ima uspone i padce. Mislim, ako nije dosta posvećene brige koliko se uvažava Ustav, koliko se uvažava pravna država, koliko se uvažavaju vrednosti u svakodnevnom životu, onda to vrlo lako može doći do, kako bih rekao, do jednog klizanja. Pogotovo kad se ne daje dovoljno pažnje i slobodi medija. Prikraćena medijska sloboda, kad ljudi više nemaju stvarne informacije o svom položaju, o položaju svoje zemlje, u stvarnim problemima sa kojima je suočeno rukovodstvo, kad se to može falsifikovati ili manipulirati sa tim, onda je to vrlo lako, mislim, dođu ljudi pod utjecaj jednih, kako bi rekao, to se sada moderno kaže, i liberalnih demokratija, a pogotovo jer je naša do nedavno najveća stranka, Slovenska demokratska stranka, imala uzornika u Orbanu, u Mađarskoj. Isti je recept, isti su zahvati, isti je odnos prema Evropskoj zajednici,
prema većem zajedništvu, solidarnosti, prema ljudskim pravima. Dakle, recept je poznat. Samo je trebalo doći do promjena snaga unutar našeg parlamenta, osvojiti vlast i ta je vlast nemilosrdno gazila po onome što se kaže pravna država i došla do trenutka izbora gdje su ljudi ipak pokazali da ne žele živjeti u takvoj iliberalnoj mađarskoj Sloveniji, nego da žele Sloveniju kakva je bila zamišljena na plebiscitu kada smo odlučivali u svojoj državi.
Slična ideologija kako ona na Orban je zafati Polska. Ungarija i Polska se dereska najgolemite glavobolki za Brisel, koji reči si da nema način da se sprotivstavi na ovije antidemokratski trendovi. Kako jedna od причините во истражувањата за кризата на либерализмот се наведува демографската промена во Источна Европа и масовното иселување на младите од исток кон запад.
What's interesting is that those people who left Poland and went to the United Kingdom and other countries in Western Europe were young, educated, entrepreneurial, and dynamic. A lot of them spoke or were ready to learn English or the languages of other host countries. And this had a huge impact on the demography of Poland. It was one of the reasons why Kaczynski and the PIS were able to succeed electorally. This issue of demography within Central Europe is incredibly important. All Central European countries are losing people. Their populations are getting smaller, the birth rate is going down, and those productive economic demographics, people in their 20s, 30s and 40s, are leaving whenever they can. This affects countries outside the European Union, like the Western Balkans, as much as it does countries inside the European Union. And when you have a population which is getting older and the younger cohort is getting younger, you have a population which is, in electoral terms, more conservative. And so what we see in Europe in an aging society is that populism, which seeks to undermine democratic processes, populism is benefiting from the aging society. In the United Kingdom, with the Brexit vote, this was as clear as the nose on your face. The older people were, the more they would vote for Brexit. And of course, older people also tend to go to the polls. They actually turn up to vote. Younger people with other concerns and with a political disaffection, who overwhelmingly were against Brexit in the United Kingdom, overwhelmingly, often didn't bother to turn up to vote. They are going to have to suffer the consequences of the generation which is now dying out, but which had that conservative impulse wanting to leave the European Union.
Голем влог во проширувањето на популистичките идеи и нивната афирмација има и неолиберализмот, кој доведе до огромни социјални разлики. Богатите станаа многу побогати, посиромашните многу посиромашни.
So, what's the key moment in all of this? The key moment in all of this, well, there are two big events. The first is the whole of the 1990s, which I like to call the decade of delusion, where the West really suffered from extreme hubris, having effectively won the Cold War. 1989 was perceived as a victory for the West. In the ideological battle between capitalism and communism, capitalism had won. And both under Clinton and Blair, and then Bush and Blair, George W. Bush and Blair, the assumption was we can do what we want. And the greatest failure that they did was not to pay attention to the integration of Russia into the Western economy, Western political arrangements, security arrangements. They allowed instead the emergence of gangster capitalism. And gangster capitalism led directly to Putin. And we must bear some responsibility for this. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that financial capitalism and neoliberalism, which had its immediate political roots in the administrations of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, was given free rein. Basically, we were allowed to borrow money way beyond the resources of the global economy, so that the value of assets to debt at one point was about 1 to 4. We were way out of kilter with our economic structure, and that led directly to 2008. And the impact of 2008, the collapse of the banking system, the near total collapse of the banking system, which was just saved, triggered a series of events which rolled along like a slow tsunami that led up to the election of Trump, to the disaffection of large numbers of working people in Europe and the United States with the processes of globalization and the neoliberal economy. And in those situations, as we happen to see in the early 1930s, it tends to be the far right which exploits the distress of hundreds of millions of ordinary people much better than the left. And so progressives were left out in the cold as we saw Trump and then Brexit and then temporarily the rise of Alternative für Deutschland, the consolidation of Orban in Hungary, of the peace in Poland, and the rise of Salvini in Italy, and so on and so forth.
Инаку Миша Глени, покрај неговата богата новинарска кариера во светската јавност, е познати како сценарист на популарната серија Мек Мафија, која се занимава со феноменот на организираниот криминал, кој процвета во времето на транзицијата по падот на Берлинскиот зид и се рашири многу побрзо од цивилизацијските вредности на Западот.
And you have seen a steady corruption of political leadership by money, by we're now talking by the oligarchy, by the 1%, by the billionaires. Much of our political system is now in hock, either to corporate money or quite simply to billionaires who have proliferated at an astonishing rate in the last 30 years. Interestingly, I mean, this is a subject I deal with when it comes to McMafia, is that I think this culture, which began in the criminalized economies of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, and obviously in the Western Balkans, we have countless examples in the former Yugoslavia, in Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, and so on. This culture of a symbiotic, corrupt relationship between politics, organized crime, and corporate business has actually sort of spread out around the world and ended up infecting the United States really quite massively, particularly from 2008 onwards. So it's something that Eastern Europe can be proud of, a very successful export, which has even stormed the bastions of democracy in Washington.
Демократијата и либералните вредности се во очигледна голема криза, што ја наложува дилемата како и каде понатаму. Која е судбината на демократијата и кому му припаѓа иднината, на демократите или автократите?
My question was, to whom belong the future, to liberals or illiberals?
I strongly believe that to liberals. Illiberals are by definition a temporary phenomenon, because even without being a Fukuyamist, even without believing that history has ended, it is clearly, just as communists had to claim that they are Democrats. Remember that? The same way illiberals praise the virtue of liberalism by denying it. It is the interest of economy, it is in the interest of people, it is the interest of the great majorities to have safeguarded division of powers, to have freedom for the individual, to have free press. That can be denied, that can be attacked, but it will come back. And my hope is that that this western rim of the former communist civilization, even if loses freedom for a while, will come back, and the unification of Europe under the banner of liberal freedoms will occur again, while people are already immunized against the danger of illiberalism.
Like the vaccine, COVID vaccine.
Like vaccination, exactly. We need a temporary disease in order to realize that we have to defend ourselves against this.
In this globalized world, with global media, people see that there is a possibility, and I am sure that they see also the differences. They see that although these are not perfect systems, the liberal democracies, they are still much better than these half authorities or illiberal democracies, or however we call them. So I think it will be a kind of model also for these countries. I think it is a transitional period.
Познатиот американски филозоф Франсис Фукујама во 90-тите го напише својот есеј за крајот на историјата, тврдејќи дека либералната демократија по падот на Берлинскиот зид ќе стане финална форма на општественото уредување во процесот на социокултуролшката еволуција. Фукујама очигледно погреши, но и понатаму тврди дека тоа негово предвидување ќе се оствари и дека популистичката пандемија сепак е привремена. Дали ќе биде така?